This is the second to the last case study. Kids Map Meadowood. This is another great one that had to do with a park where we optimized translation of data for site-specific health promotion. And there's something that I think is really important about PPM is that we're talking about small geography. And when you're trying to affect change and to understand where people are coming from, it's really hard to do at a large scale. That it's important to think about honing in on a specific geography to understand site-specific health promotion. It doesn't have to be health, but I'm a public health person, so so for me it is health promotion. And we compiled recommendations, and the youth presented to the public. We developed and nurtured social connectedness among neighborhoods. And so remember, this is the neighborhood I was telling you about with a lot of not so subtle racism happening. And I'm going to go into more detail about what happened with this as a result of this project. We created action steps for improving the neighborhood, and we continue to engage young people in addressing issues that were identified through the PPM for projects to be ongoing. This is a map that the city put together of calls to police for reported serious crimes, but this is by change, so how have the number of calls increased or decreased? The neighborhood right here is that I'm talking to you about is Meadowood, and it's one of the areas in Madison that had an extreme increase in calls to police for reports for serious crimes. This is the same community that I showed you before with the map. And so you were talking about parks. When we did this participatory photo mapping project, there was a young boy who was a migrant, a child from a migrant worker family, and he didn't speak very good English, and the majority of the young people in this project were African American, and and there were other Latino kids too, but he wanted to kind of go off on his own, and there were some very specific things that he wanted us to know about that were important to him, and this is one of them. He just felt like, this is a green field, this is where my dad comes and plays soccer with me, this is where my family comes and has picnics. Oh, and by the way, this is just an example of how an image is geocoded. So here you have Meadowood number 2, and as we've gone on, like sometimes I put the kids' names, but sometimes I don't. So they have two things. They're carrying around a GPS unit and a camera, and every time they take a picture, they push mark, enter, which makes the GPS unit make a waypoint. It makes a mark, so that the camera, the picture is attached to the place using time, and so there's a lot of logistics, and we've made a lot of mistakes because a kid might drop a camera, the batteries fall out, you stick the batteries back in, but you don't actually reprogram the camera. It's not going to work. It's you're not going to be able to map it, and so, but even though they have two things, they have the GPS unit and the camera. We're actually using 3 things to make the map because there's a piece of software that links them called GPS Photo Link. Since all of these projects, we've changed how we're doing it to make it easier. Yeah, and yeah, it's constantly getting improved. I was just saying to Dave that I want to make a collection of photographs that come back with basketball hoops, because every single project that we do with young people come back with basketball hoops, and you get your public basketball hoops and your private basketball hoops, and this is the same project. It's a different one than the one Dave showed you, but these 2 pictures came from the same project. This is the back of someone's house. We dunk and stuff on that. I like to play ball here. This is a safe place. Their mom and grandma own both those buildings. I feel safe when they are around. And so I think this is huge, looking at where kids feel safe in an area, in a community with escalating violence. This community has, it's pretty much, it's becoming more violent and there's more crime every day. But what's very interesting is when you start to assess kids' behavior, you find out that kids that live in a heightened area don't tend to not go out. They just assess their risk differently than kids that live in a safer community. So they might go and play basketball, and they might know that that kid over there has a gun in his pocket, but I'm not going to stop going to play basketball. I'm just going to walk way around, and I'm going to avert my eyes, and I'm going to go play that hoop over there, and that they're safe. Relatively speaking. Well, so we did the PPM project, and the main theme from this PPM project was Meadowood Park. And so we decided we were going to focus on the park. So we came up with this theme the research project ended, the nurse I was working with, who is just a lot of times, if you get the right community partner, she just took the information that was provided her and just went. And she's, actually one of my heroes. She's a pretty incredible lady. But wrote a couple grants, got money to do a couple things, one of which was to build a community garden with a kids garden component. And so these kids that we were working with, who, maybe, it's just very interesting because you grow this food and sometimes you come in the morning to garden and you find that someone's taken all of your food and thrown it on the street. But the people that aren't throwing the food on the street are the kids that are gardening. It changes the way that they perceive their environment. It gives them more pride. It helps them learn how to eat better. Another thing that we did with this project was we used the information to write a grant that got a farmer's market. So this community that is I don't know if the term food desert is familiar. I personally don't like this concept because if I lived in a community and was called a food desert, I wouldn't like it. But the whole idea is that you live in a community where there is no access to food except for fast food. And research shows that poor communities have a higher access rate to fast food restaurants and a lower access rate to healthful food. And the opposite is true for rich neighborhoods. And so this community is a food desert. So because of this nurse and because of the PPM project and sort of identifying this park and this part of the neighborhood as a community building area, she got money to start a farmer's market, and now there's a farmer's market, and the farmer's market takes food stamps. And it's being led by an African-American community leader who's sort of become well known for starting farmer's markets in high-risk neighborhoods. Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question because there's a process for how this happens. And so not only did the Parks Department have to say yes, but this garden was actually helped along by a nonprofit organization in Madison called Community Action Coalition, which has a community garden tier in it. And so we had to go to the Parks Department and say, we want a community garden here. And then we had to go to CAC, the Community Action Coalition, and say, will you help us? We don't know what we're doing. And so you mobilize the community and you mobilize your partner and the stakeholders, and collectively you get it done. But you're right, the city had to approve this, but because the decision to say yes was leveraged by partnering with Community Action Coalition, who their goal is to get as many community gardens around Madison as they can. And what CAC will do eventually is, as soon as this starts to get established, is they'll say, okay, this isn't a CAC garden anymore. You guys are on your own, and we're going to go somewhere else. And so, since I've been in Madison, they've actually stopped helping really, really successful community gardens, and they start to establish these small beginning ones. And since this garden has been started, it's growing. They're actually increasing the land. And it's interesting because it isn't completely welcome in the community, because there's the soccer coach who's like, you guys are putting a garden in my soccer field, And yet there is area in this park for him to continue to play soccer, but, some of the community members have to get used to the idea.